Hello and welcome to Smash Hit Sports. I'm your host, Cody. Today we have Michelle Meyer, the founder of NIL Network on. You can find her at NIL Network on Instagram. First off, your branding on there is incredible. All of the content from the top down is incredible, but welcome, Michelle. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited for our convo about all things NIL today.
Yeah, and NIL it's new for everybody. It's something that was kind of talked about a couple years ago and it'll never happen. And then all of a sudden it's on top of us. So for somebody who is on the business side of that, what made you get into NIL?
Yeah, so my background is really in coaching. I was a collegiate athlete, and then when beach volleyball was added as a college sport, I was lucky enough to get in at University of Hawaii and coach beach volleyball, and at Pepperdine work for USA Volleyball for a number of years. When I was coaching is when the Ed O'Bannon case was settled and really brought a ton of public awareness around name, image, and likeness and how the NCAA can still, sell some of these pieces off. That's kind of the video game case, EA Sports, and make money even after these athletes had already graduated. And started studying it then, and then fast forward to the end of 2020, and it was coming to college sports in 2021. There was no way around it, with Florida getting in there, passing their bill to go into effect on July 1st. NCAA working group was meant to initially vote, their NIL working group, on making those changes. That ended up obviously not happening. But yeah, and as I started looking into it more, there wasn't really a space for people to go to understand all of these changes that were coming the next summer. Like, NIL legitimately is the biggest change to college sports since probably Title IX. So it's been about 50 years. And, I started NIL Network to try to bring together some of those resources and to help people really navigate this space and new world that we're in.
Yeah, and I don't think saying that it's the biggest thing to happen to college sports in the last 50 years is an understatement. I mean, it's huge from an athlete standpoint, from coaching, for businesses and how they interact with players in schools. So being the NIL coordinator at San Diego State, they are on an incredible run. At the time of this recording, it's before the Final Four, so we'll see how we fare after this. But what are your takeaways from how NIL impacts these student athletes since you worked with the university and with these schools?
Yeah, so San Diego State actually was one of the first universities to hire an NIL specific role around the whole entire country, which I thought, I was already living in San Diego, and I was like, man, this is really innovative for a school that's outside of the Power Five to make this happen. Before, I think Tennessee, Stanford, Illinois were the three that also had an NIL admin before I got in there. So it was a really cool opportunity. I got in there, I helped build their NIL program, worked with all the athletes kind of one-on-one to help create their NIL strategies. And it's just been, it's such a wild space right now, especially with the different, landscape and rules across the country. And the athletes' experiences also are very different from, you have your high profile athletes, whether they have that high profile brand because of their status as, an elite athlete, or whether it's because they were able to build just a massive following by sharing who they are as themselves. But those athletes' experience is much different from, your average college athlete who's a full-time student, full-time athlete, now going, okay, maybe it makes sense to partner with the local restaurant down the street. Is it going to be life-changing money? Probably not, but there's still some really cool opportunities, I think, across the board for all athletes if they want to be proactive and go after some of those things.
Yeah, as somebody who played college athletics, it comes from the jobs that I had to work in order to get the pizza money and the beer money on the weekends, or in order to, buy the creatine and the protein, that kind of stuff, coming from a D3 program. Like, I had to pay for all that myself. So NIL would have been huge when I was in college. Coming from your collegiate athletic experience, how does that impact with how you work with these athletes? And what do you wish, that you could have taken advantage of if you had NIL during your time?
Yeah, I think with my experience as a coach, and especially in a Olympic sport or revenue generating sport, that I look at it from very much the perspective of the 99% of athletes and what their experience really looks like, and what some of my previous athletes I coached would have taken advantage of, what I could have taken advantage of. And I think that, of course, as a former coach, and I look at some of my athletes that would have just made great coaches. They could have gone out and done private lessons for a couple hours a week. And you're spot on that, it's, as a college athlete, you're so dang busy that you can't really work those typical part-time jobs. It is so hard. Their schedule is always evolving and changing. And so one of the things I really like about NIL, it's like, that's entrepreneurial. They get to control their own schedule. If they're, busy with finals, or if they have really busy in season, they can cut back on it a little bit. And so I think having that flexibility, even if you're saying, it's for the pizza money or the beer money, that it's still more than they were able to make before. And I think that's like the really, really cool part about all of this.
Yeah, to me, the benefit that these athletes have, it's so tremendous based off of, you see these athletic directors who are getting paid $5, $4, $3 million to run these athletic departments. And it's like, why can't we give the product on the courts or field or whatever a cut of that? So this isn't, and NIL is not we'll get into that, but how would you define NIL as somebody who works with it every single day?
Yeah, I think it's it is using an athlete, and it's not even really an athlete specific thing. Any person, it's really the right of publicity, right? That every U.S. citizen already inherently has, whether you know it, take advantage of it or not. But it is using a part of your likeness, and whether that's name, image, and whatnot, to either promote, a third party business and services, or to promote, their own business and services. So that would be more of the coaching side, but it's saying, I have this big personal brand, following, an engaged community, and can either drive new sales and new audiences for different businesses, or even for my own business to make some money, compensation, that kind of thing.
So there are several avenues for athletes to go ahead, and you brought up the entrepreneurial side, them doing their own thing, and then also promoting another company. What are your, as far as avenues for athletes, how would you recommend that they go about, like, hey, these are what your opportunities look like?
Yeah, and I think it's like, we haven't even really scratched the surface of what this is going to look like in 4 to 5 years. Right now, for most athletes, getting started, they're going on and utilizing some of these marketplaces. So the marketplaces there's probably about 30 different companies out there that are connecting. Athletes make a profile on one side, brands and businesses make, some kind of marketing campaign on the other, and then they can connect with the athletes for different opportunities. So Open Doors is a big one of those. They have a ton of both school partnerships and then athletes within their marketplace. And big brands, big national brands will get on there and have a mass activation of like a couple thousand athletes around the country, where athletes can go and apply for that job. Usually it's super simple, like a pre-templated Instagram story that they post. They're told what kind of hashtags to use, and they make $50, or it's an in-kind deal or whatnot. On the other side, which I think is not developed at all yet, is the local market. And that's where most of the opportunities and like the meaningful opportunities are going to lie for 99% of athletes, and what really makes sense for local businesses. Like the local pizza shop that is around San Diego State, they want to get in front of a young demographic, 18 to 24-year-olds, Gen Z. It's really hard for them to organically reach that audience. That's a lot of college athletes who's following them, whether it's their friends, whether it's just students on campus. And so using those, student athletes for partnerships to get in front of the local community makes a ton of sense. Now, say local businesses, for the most part, have no idea how to do this yet, or really understand like the return on investment they can make through NIL deals. And I don't really blame them. They've been told for decades, like, don't even give a kid a free soda with his pizza, because you could cost them their eligibility because of impermissible benefits. So it is a total mindset like shift for that business as well. And it's just a really hard, I guess, onboarding across the country for those local companies.
Yeah. And that has been some of my like favorite NIL deals that I've seen is, we are the official barbecue place of the Notre Dame offensive line, right? It's a bunch of big dudes with big barbecue sandwiches or a set of ribs or whatever. Stuff like that, I think it's a unique way to say, hey, this is what South Bend has to offer, for example, or, a local pizza shop. Like, there are a lot of college towns that have really great food options. But this is just the fat boy in me talking, that I would have loved to have a deal with a pizza place, even if it was like a free slice every once in a while. But it's continually changing and evolving, even in just the short time that we've seen it. It's, you described it as the Wild West, but what does the next 2 to 3 years look like, and why do you think it is, the Wild West?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the Wild West just because of how this all rolled out. I think it was something that we don't really have anything historically to look at with the state standing up and passing their own state NIL laws. I can't say that we've had, I mean, off the top of my head, other state laws around the NCAA and saying, hey, we're going to be able to have NIL rights in our state, come this date, and other states would not. Now, that's not actually how it ended up playing out with the NCAA updating their bylaws and permitting all athletes, regardless of state NIL law or not, to take advantage of their NIL. But we still do have about, I don't even know what it's at now, 30 states across the country that have a slightly varying state NIL law. Then we have institutional policies. So every university has their own set of guidelines. And then, the NCAA interim policy, which doesn't have a lot of pieces in it. And it's pretty broad, which is why a lot of people have been able to get around some of those rules and create, like, I'll give the example, and I know we're going to get to the collective talk, but one of the NCAA interim policies is no NIL deals based off of, or to induce an athlete, essentially. Nothing can be based off of enrollment or continued enrollment at a university. Now, a lot of these companies are writing into the contract, like, not contingent on, you being an athlete at San Diego State, but you're going to have to make an appearance in San Diego every month, let's say. Mm-hmm. And so it'd be very difficult for an athlete to commit to Notre Dame and then have to fly out to San Diego to fulfill their contractual obligations every month. So that's why it's just been a very kind of hectic space, and a lot of people, but at the end of the day, also, this stuff's been happening for decades in terms of the boosters getting in there and kind of working their ways around the rules. But in terms of where this is going in the next couple of years, I think it'll be very interesting to follow. We have a new NCAA president, Charlie Baker, who's been in there for a month. There's a congressional hearing about NIL on Wednesday. NCAA really wants a federal bill. Is it going to happen? I'm not that optimistic. I don't even really know if I feel it's necessary, but I think on the, just in 2 to 3, 4, 5 years, as local businesses, regional businesses start understanding this space a little bit more, I think we'll see a lot more kind of authentic NIL deals that aren't as connected to just, here's $1 million to go out to the school.
Yeah. And it seems, I don't understand and maybe you can educate me here, but I don't understand the federal legislation side of this, saying that essentially, they are having this hearing on Wednesday. What would be the goal of that? Because ultimately the NCAA controls athlete eligibility, right? So what would a federal law or bill do in order to help regulate this? It just doesn't seem like that partnership makes any sense.
Yeah, and I mean, my background's not in law, so really it's just from speaking to, different attorneys to try to understand all of the nuances of this. But essentially, and we saw this from the Supreme Court case, the Alston case back in 2021, when NCAA kind of got it handed to them in terms of, our Supreme Court justices calling out the even legality of their business model. Mm-hmm. And after that happened, the NCAA has just been pretty powerless. And even, the Cavender twins, the first NIL infraction about a month ago, and then that booster, John Ruiz, says, well, I'm going to turn around and sue the NCAA. Now, what I've heard from a federal bill is they want to take back control. If our government says they can get some limited antitrust exemptions, and then they can put some more regulations around this without opening themselves up to hundreds of millions of dollars of lawsuits, that's what, everyone's saying. That's why the NCAA is really hoping and begging for a federal bill. But at the same time, it's really the athletes that are going to lose out on the back end of that with these additional rules and regulations. So I don't know. I don't really see it happening, but Charlie Baker was a very strategic hire because of his past as, working within our government. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's really, I imagine that, because right now they open the floodgates. I imagine NIL gets reined in a little bit from a, policy perspective, because right now we don't really have a ton, but it'll be interesting to see how that, progresses over the next couple of years. But, and so NIL, obviously there are concerns that go along with it. What are your biggest concerns on your end of, hey, this is some of the negative sides of NIL?
One of my biggest, I guess, and I don't even think this one gets as much media attention, but one of my biggest concerns is, with just how rabid some college sports fans are. And now, especially, they're feeling a little bit more empowered because they're saying athletes are getting paid all this money. We're treating them like pro athletes now. And that impact of, athletes are so accessible via direct message through their social media channels. And some of those just really nasty people who get in there and feel so entitled to, spew whatever kind of hatred that they want to. And I think that now is happening more, or the entitlement is more, because they're going, these kids are making money. They deserve to hear all this stuff. And you're like, I don't know. The mental health aspect of that is a bit concerning for me. On the other side, I mean, the recruiting inducements have been happening for decades. I don't think it's sustainable in the same way that it is going right now. I know that's what the NCAA's biggest concern is. We need to have, as level of possible of a recruiting field, I guess, which hasn't really been a thing, but now we see it in the transfer portal and the type of inducements that are going on. And is an athlete really choosing the best place for them if it's just tied to a lot of money? But is that also the end of the world? Because these athletes, especially in the revenue generating sports, a lot come from low income backgrounds and are able to now help and support their families. So yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, it's one of those where it's like, well, negative for who, right? These athletes getting paid can be seen, especially from if an athlete gets $1 million, $2 million deal, right? And then as a freshman, and then they end up not performing to the level of a recruit they are, right? If they were a 5-star or whatever, and they end up, they could have a great college career, but still not pan out to that level of success. And then you're sitting here like, well, what was our return on investment? You're giving a lot of money to these young kids, but at the same time, if that helps that kid's family, be able to afford to send his siblings to school, or be able to afford, to come see him play, like stuff like that is something I don't think a lot of people consider. But it's NIL, my favorite part of all of this. I love grumpy old coaches. It is one of the best parts of college athletics. It is in every sport, at every level. There are always grumpy old social media, and when we had to walk uphill both ways to get to class. All right, but the media loves to talk about how these coaches have to adjust into a new climate, which is absolutely true. But from a day-to-day standpoint, does this truly have an impact on what coaches, like a Saban or a Dabo or a Larrañaga, or does this impact what they do every day?
I think so. I mean, it is really impacted, especially revenue generating sports, on the recruiting side. But I will say, the issue a lot of these old grumpy coaches are having is they feel like they've lost some control and some of their power. And it's like now these athletes, especially with the transfer portal opening up, it's like the athletes are more empowered. College athletes are more empowered now than they have ever been in the history of the NCAA. And I think that's terrifying to some coaches, especially the old ones who don't understand, how powerful even, having a personal brand is and what that can do for athletes after they're even done playing. But they've got to adapt. If they want to stay in this game, there's no way around it. It's not going anywhere. We're not going backwards to, the good old days or whatever they want to call it. So, the old grumpy coaches are one of my favorite things to follow too. It just cracks me up.
So speaking with coaches and staff, you talked about being hired on as a full-time staffer for San Diego State, and I think it's almost all across the entire Power Five, as well as reaching down into some of these other conferences. Do you see every major college having some type of NIL position as we move forward in this landscape?
I'm not sure yet, because I think that right now it's like, with it being so chaotic and with, NIL, or schools not really having their program and their structure fully together, I think it's really helpful to have someone in there that is just like my job in there. I spent 2 hours like reading about NIL every day so I can inform our leadership team, our athletic director, about what those trends are, how things are developing, and help our coaches. And also to build out the program, what kind of education goes into it, what kind of partnerships make sense in the marketplace, as well as doing kind of one-on-one sessions with the athletes. Now, if it settles, in the next couple of years and schools have their structure in place, now do they need somebody in there full time to just do consulting kind of with the athletes? I'm not sure yet, especially I think that some of that, the onus of that is being taken on by these collectives, which are, businesses meant to source opportunities for a particular school's athletes, even though it's separate from the school. And like I'll give the example, Division Street, Oregon's collective has been doing, I've heard, a great job in terms of helping the athletes build their brands and creating a strategy and taking on a lot of those roles that I had as the full-time NIL admin at San Diego State. So we'll see. They're growing now. And, if we know anything about Power Five and how they spend money, it's all the kickback from the recruiting side. And I think it would be a recruiting advantage and something to talk about to recruits, that you have someone full-time to help athletes navigate this. But we'll see.
Is that so? The NIL collectives have always been, at least in the last year or so, an enigma to me as to where are they getting this money from? How is that being spent? What are they actually doing? Texas A&M is one that, it came out that they were supposedly giving $35,000 to every player on the roster. And it's like, well, how does that really work? So from your perspective, what is an NIL collective and how do they operate?
Yeah, I think I've seen two different models. So the first one I think is easier for us to wrap our heads around, which it functions really as like a sports agency. And so they will have, athletes from a particular school. Let's use San Diego State as an example. So San Diego State athletes sign into some kind of contract agreement with this agency. Typically, I guess the difference, it's a marketing agency. It wouldn't be a sports agency that's actually negotiating their professional contracts, but a marketing agency. And then they go out and educate local businesses, sign into one-on-one or one-off deals for athletes. So local pizzeria collective goes and talks to them. Hey, we'd like to do this activation with, these lists of athletes or whatnot. Sign that deal, go off and do it. So I think that one is a little bit more, we have a history of that one versus the other kind, which is kind of the nonprofit collective. And this is the one that's been causing much more of a stir, is basically they are a fundraising entity that is going after they're usually started by the donors of that particular school. So they've got the big network of all the boosters of the school, and they're taking in donations. They also usually have a subscription type model to support the athletes with different benefits that they get for that. And they would sign athletes into a longer length contract, let's say a year. Athletes are making the same amount of money every month, and then every month they have different quid pro quo type activations. So doing, something within the community. I know our guys at San Diego State did ALS walk was one of their first type of activations. So working with other nonprofits. And it's going to be interesting because of the collectives I've spoken to, they're already feeling a little bit like that model maybe isn't fully sustainable to keep going back to the same donors and boosters every year, asking for a lot of money. And they're going, well, how do we still raise all that? Especially once you get out of the, universities that have a really strong following in sports culture, Power Five in the South, Midwest. I think it's going to be a challenge to keep up with. And I also think that, a lot of these businesses were popped up overnight because they were afraid of falling behind, wanted to support their team, wanted to be the ones to have that collective. And now they're going, holy moly, this is a full-time job. I already have my full-time job. What have I done with jumping in here? And so, yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah, those are the ones that have always seemed a little bit off, right? Like they just don't. It seems very similar to the like, hey, we'll give you $10,000 if you show up at this charity event for 30 minutes, and it's like, is that really what it's for? Like, probably not.
But then I go
So
back and forth too. I'm like, I don't really care if these, really wealthy people are giving their money to the
that's
athletes, and then like, yeah,
that's the
like,
thing, right? Is it like, do I care if they give if some millionaire gives a 19-year-old kid 10 grand? That doesn't bother me at all. Like, it's not my money, but I also wouldn't want to see, if I was involved with a program, I wouldn't want to see them giving, or focusing a ton of attention on something like this where like that's great and all, but I don't know if it benefits the program as a whole and the school as a whole. And that it's really interesting from a recruiting standpoint. So obviously being able to say, hey, if you come to Notre Dame, you have a giant platform because Notre Dame is in of itself a huge market. But how, from a recruiting standpoint, how does NIL impact? Because people have talked about talent acquisition payments as essentially, hey, come to our school, we'll give you $1 million. But there's also the side of NIL that's like, hey, if you come to Clemson, we have great opportunities set up that you can work with local businesses, do these types of things. That seems to actually be a massive benefit.
yep. It's like how it's gonna develop again is really interesting because I think a lot of athletes who are current college athletes, NIL went into effect. They see the headlines. This kid makes $1 million. This kid gets a car, and a lot of them are like, "Well, where's my NIL money?" And I feel like that's even the expectation from some of the top recruits right now, just because of how this landscape has played out over the last year and a half. And they're going, "Well, how much can you guarantee me?" And they're playing this game that's a lot of smoke and mirrors. And like, I think it's actually, that part is really messy because athletes cannot actually, if they sign an NIL deal, before they sign with the school, they sign their NIL before they sign their
NLI,
NLI,
yeah.
then they would lose their eligibility if that can be proven by the NCAA. But if they don't sign that and they go and sign their NLI based off of this NIL deal, there's no guarantee legally that they're going to be able to actually pay whatever they said. And so we saw that kind of play out with the Rashada incident at Florida. And you're going, well, that's freaking terrible and messy and just like something that an 18-year-old kid should not be dealing with. Like there's so many puppets in the space right now that are just, yeah. I feel like that was a bit of a tangent. What was the question
No,
again?
I agree. It's really because this kid's trying to decide where he wants to play football for the next 4 years. But there's a lot that goes into that where you want to live, like coaching, right? Like obviously Rashad is an incredible prospect, and I would imagine that he hopes to go pro. But it's one of those where it's like, well, you said that this money was going to be here, but now it's not. Is Florida still a good enough program to play for without that? And that it's a mess. And that's the side of NIL that I don't like. As far as seeing these kids work with businesses and making money off their name, image, and likeness of their brand, and that to me is a awesome, awesome opportunity. But the recruiting side of things is which recruiting in college football, college basketball, it's always been shady. So I think it's just a different thing for what has been going on for the last 20 years. Am I wrong in saying that?
No, I think it's just more, it's getting a lot more media and press than it did ever before. And nobody, I think, understood also the dollar amounts that were being paid to these athletes, like the brown bag type cash, just because it wasn't that public of information. But like, I don't know, probably my favorite little documentary, 30 for 30, about, what was it, SMU back in the day. Like,
Oh yeah, before they got the death penalty.
yeah,
Yeah,
Pony Express. And a phenomenal documentary. And you look at that and go, okay, this shit was going on like in the 70s and the cars and the money and everything around that. Like, it's not changed. It's just a lot more public right now.
Yeah, it's insane. Social media plays a massive impact on NIL because different athletes have these different audiences, right? And you have athletes who I would say, have built their own social media following, like the Cavender twins, or Destroying back in the day was a really interesting case because he ended up not being able to play football because his YouTube channel was so large, and he picked YouTube over playing football. But you get like the Cavender twins and Livy Dunn, and then you have the other side of it where I would say like Quinn Ewers I don't think he himself has an incredible personal brand. However, being the starting quarterback of the University of Texas is in and of itself a personal brand. Do you think that social media is something that athletes now have to treat like a business, or can you still kind of ignore that and do the NIL stuff?
I think that, but Quinn's got the great mullet thing. Come on. No.
Yeah, that is, if I could do that, maybe that's, hey, sponsor the podcast, somebody who does hair products. I'll grow a mullet out for you.
Perfect. Yeah, it's, I would say like, and I actually included this in my, like seminars that I run. It's like, there's almost 3 different pillars that make these athletes have these huge social media followings, right? We have the elite athletes. And I would say even like Bryce Young, like phenomenal athlete, has not like, as far as I've seen, doesn't like, he has his massive following because he's a football athlete. I don't feel like he's ever put like, maybe a little more now, but like that much intentionality behind growing it. It's grown because of his performance on the field. Versus the Cavender twins, Livy Dunn, who, have their TikTok followings, and it went viral during COVID. And yes, they are obviously, I think the Cavender twins are still in it for the women's basketball tournament. Livy Dunn's a great gymnast.
They got knocked out last night. Oh, Miami lost last night to LSU. Yeah.
Oh, well,
tough.
LSU. It's pretty freaking good.
Yeah.
And then the last one would be kind of this entrepreneurial, like go-getter type athlete, which I think of like Chase Griffin from UCLA.
Yes.
He's done a phenomenal job in NIL, and he is killing it. I don't even know if he's going back to UCLA this year, but he's the backup quarterback for UCLA. I don't think he's ever had any viral moments in a Livy Dunn type capacity, but has been really intentional and gone after this and done a phenomenal job. So I think that there's a lot of different ways for athletes to kind of build their brands, their platforms, and position themselves for different NIL opportunities, even if they're not that into but they need one of them, I guess. They need to be a go-getter. They need to put intentionality on their social media platforms, or be this elite athlete on the field that grows because people want to follow them and engage with them.
That's fair. That makes sense that, you have to at least pick one path. I want to get into some of the fun stuff here. There have been some incredible NIL deals. My absolute favorite is the DeColdest Crawford working with the air conditioning company in Lincoln, Nebraska, is just an incredible play on his name. The Bijan Robinson released a Dijon mustard. What are some of the favorite NIL deals that you've seen?
Oh man, there's been so many at this point. It's hard to keep track of. All of them, but I think I'm right in line with you there, that these ones that are so intentional and they just make sense. And you look at it and go, like, they get national press and publicity because it's just, yeah. I think that there's been, let's see, Unilever, I think it's the soap, has done like really intentional campaigns, and not so much on, I don't know. They are intentionally picking athletes and then helping them build their platforms and sharing their stories. So they pick athletes that don't have like a, typical pathway to being a elite athlete at the collegiate level, have had some kind of, hardships growing up or whatnot, and then really showing a light on those stories and helping them grow. So I really liked those ones. I think it was actually either led by or, I don't remember, but, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot out there.
The other thing is, so I had this video that I saw a while back, and I wanted to bring it up. Clemson announced plans for an NIL center on campus. It lets athletes record podcasts. They can do photo shoots with products. They can record multimedia stuff. They have a staffer on site that'll help, work with businesses, either local or, larger companies, to help negotiate these kinds of deals. is that the future of NIL at like the biggest level? Because to me, that seems like an unbelievable opportunity to say, hey, the university is a dedicated place for something like this.
Yeah. So Clemson actually, they started or had plans for that even before July 1st, 2021, or like that was already in the
Really?
works. So they finally just like finished it and launched it a couple weeks ago. But they are definitely the first ones. And I remember seeing that, I guess, a couple years ago now and going, holy moly, this is going to be very cool. And I think that it's starting to, like, I can't think of any schools off the top of my head, but there have been a couple other schools that come out and said, hey, we're looking at building, something similar, probably not at the same level as Clemson, but it does make for a very easy spot for athletes to go and to build their personal brands and whatnot. Having those resources, especially since again they are so dang busy and they're spending so much time around the athletic building anyway. So to be able to pop in there and do some stuff, I think is very, very cool. San Diego State's actually building kind of like a new media hub that's thinking about maybe an NIL side of it as well, which I think would be awesome.
Yeah, I've always loved one of my favorite like group of content creators to follow is people who create content for the universities, like the graphics people and the photographers and videographers for these schools, to get to be able to see some of the behind the scenes stuff that goes into, because all those cool graphics and videos that show up on game day and Saturdays and before volleyball home games and basketball home games and stuff, like those are made by somebody, created by somebody. So it's really cool to see that type of talent intersect with what these athletes do. As far as, there have been a lot of really cool stories about athletes using their NIL for good. And Blake Corum is one that stands out to me from Michigan, donated, I think, a ton of turkeys around Thanksgiving using the money that he's made from NIL at Michigan. What are some of the best examples you've seen of athletes using their NIL to help benefit others?
Yeah, there has been a lot. And I think that that is something that people did not, for better or worse, really anticipate going into NIL. They're like, oh, all these athletes are going to be making all this money for themselves and blah, blah, blah. But it's been really cool to see, giving back not only on a compensation side, but I also think getting involved with the community, putting some clinics on, or just those kind of pieces are very, very cool. One that I really liked, and this was out the gates on, I think, July 1st, 2021, Dylan Gibbons, who I believe, was he a Notre Dame player, and then transferred to FSU?
I think so. That sounds right. You do a quick Google search.
And so Dylan raised a lot of money for basically this kid who he had met, I think, at a game, and then when he transferred to FSU, to be able to bring this kid and his family down to watch him play. And I think it was just a really, really heartwarming story, and just to show, like, this is something that athletes can now do. And we've seen a number of different kind of cases like that, and just a fundraising and to be able to give back to different communities is awesome.
Yeah, looking up Dylan Gibbons' name, those are like the first four things that pop up are this story about, him helping out this family. So it's it's cool he did transfer from Notre Dame, but it's cool to see these. And that's another thing that athletes can do from a branding perspective too, is like it looks good to help and help out. And obviously a lot of these athletes are doing it, at a place from their heart. But it's not a bad thing to say, like, hey, this is what I do with my free time, especially when you're trying to impress these NFL or college or NBA teams or, Major League Volleyball, the whole, like, you're trying to impress these clubs, and that's one way to do it. So NIL Network, your company fascinates me because of all of what it has the capacity to do. But what role does NIL Network play in the NIL space? What do you guys provide?
Yeah. So like I said, I started it back in 2020, really as a passion project to try to bring together a lot of different resources to help everyone understand all these changes. Since then, of course, now it's been, 2.5 years. So it's evolved to have different databases up there. Like I think recruits are really starting to use it to look at universities and what they're offering in terms of NIL resources and partnerships. Like what can they expect once they get to the school, since that's now part of their recruiting conversations. And also, I recently launched something called NIL Verified, which is for, this space is very entrepreneurial on the industry side. I think I've tracked over 500 startups that are coming in here and working in some capacity with athletes. And now that's your agencies, marketing agencies, NIL agencies, sports agencies, and then you have all these platforms, marketplaces, connecting athletes with brands and fans and NFT platforms. And there is probably 15 different sub-industries under the NIL umbrella. And one thing that I was fearful of when I started NIL Network, thinking about just how much this was going to be a very popular industry for people to want to work in, but also without a barrier to entry, rules that were very confusing, that we were going to have some, unfortunately, bad apples in the space, some bad actors who were not as trustworthy. But because everyone's a startup, it's going to be a challenge for athletes to understand who they can trust. And even on the administrator side, nobody has really reviews yet or understands or able to say, hey, we're a 5-star company or whatnot.
Yeah,
so,
it's like there's no Kelly Blue Book for these NIL spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. And so essentially with my athlete service provider directory, and now NIL Verified, is trying to create that kind of Kelly Blue Book. So I have that database up there where I ask companies to provide more information just about their business model, how many athletes they work with, different pieces. But then with NIL Verified, I've partnered with an attorney, former compliance director, to put together a business verification process. So businesses come in, they go through that process with him, and then after they become verified, when they meet the requirements that shows that their business model, the contracts they make athletes sign into are fair and equitable to the athletes, then myself on NIL Network will try to market and promote those companies as much as possible and get them in front of athletes and make sure that they're having success and differentiating themselves from those bad actors. So got that finally launched about a month ago. It was a much longer project. Probably took me 10 months to get through. Launched with 8 different companies. But really started that after I was at San Diego State and I just saw a bunch of terrible contracts coming through, and 18 to 21-year-old, athletes coming in going, oh my God, this company wants to represent me. What is that? And I'm like, please don't sign that. I can't tell you not to sign that. I'm not a lawyer. I can't even properly vet this for you, but take it to a lawyer, get it read, and make sure that you understand what you're signing into, because from my non-legal eye, I can see that this is not a great contract for you. So trying to protect athletes in that way, and also trying to provide support for the companies that are doing it right. I also host a NIL Accelerator, which is a 4-hour half-day course. I did another one on Saturday. It was awesome. And finally, last thing I'm doing is building NIL program blueprints for universities around the country, because I am a little shocked that we're 2.5 years and what is being provided. Once you get outside the Power 5, there's a lot of schools that are just still ignoring that this exists at all. And I'm going, you don't need tens of thousands of dollars or a massive budget, but you do need to do something. You need to pull together an NIL hub and show some support for your athletes and the local community. So that's what we do on NIL Network. It's a lot.
Yeah, that's you somehow manage to service the athletes, the businesses, and the universities. That's pretty much everybody involved with NIL. That's nothing short of incredible. It blows my mind how far we've come in just a short amount of time. But that being said, if you guys want to learn more about NIL, anything at all, her content on Instagram is incredible. Her website is great if you want to take a deeper dive into NIL. It's at NIL Network on Instagram, and her link is in her bio there. You can find all that kind of stuff. Michelle, is there anything that people need to be looking out for coming from you, from your content?
I would say, I guess the only other piece, if people are interested or if they have specific questions about NIL, usually on Wednesday evenings, I host just an open Q&A where anyone can jump on and ask their questions. It usually is a really good conversation with people all over the country and very different, not walks of life, but ideas around NIL, whether it's somebody who wants to start a company, athletes, parents. I get everyone on there, and it's a good little conversation. So that's another avenue if people want to learn more about this.
Well, I appreciate your time, Michelle. I think you've done the listeners a huge service today. I know I learned a lot. That being said, if you guys like this kind of content, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. I'm hoping to bring a lot more of this type of stuff your way, because NIL, it's not going anywhere. So Michelle, thank you. And we will see you guys in the next one.
Thank you. And go Aztecs.
Go Aztecs.